What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Slaw Sports Show. It is Sunday, October 17th here on the Slaw Sports Show. We got a lot to talk about today. A lot of football, as always. We had some pretty good games yesterday in college football. If you missed out, can check those out. A lot of great games. Looking at the college football world overall right now, I think it's pretty much safe to say that Georgia is probably the best team in college football right now. And they are right now looking like they are the favorite to win the national championship this season. They're just miles ahead of any other team, in college football. Their defense is elite right now. They just knocked off number 11 Kentucky 30-13. So Georgia right now looks like the best team in college football. We saw the loss from Alabama last week against Texas A&M. But still, right now, Georgia is the number one team. Yet again, they should be at the end of this week and continue to be going forward. They are the best team in the country. But today, we're not talking college football. Today, we are talking NFL football because it's NFL Sunday today. A lot of great games to talk about on today's slate that's already kicked off in London across the pond. We had a London game last week, the Atlanta Falcons against the New York Jets in London last week to kick off NFL Sunday. Today, this morning, we had the Jaguars and the Dolphins kicking off across the pond this morning. Right now, this game is set going into the end of the second quarter. Less than a minute remaining before the half. We're going to keep you posted on how this game is going throughout the hour today during this show and let you know what's going on in this game and keep you guys updated. Looks like Jacksonville just got a big field goal. They are late. Actually, a touchdown. Trevor Lawrence to Marvin Jones, 30-yard, 28-yard touchdown. So a near 30-yard bomb by Trevor Lawrence to Marvin Jones. They get on the board, get their first touchdown of the game here right before halftime. But right now, Miami is still leading 13-9, looking to be 10 going forward in this game. Tua Tagovailoa made his return to the lineup today. Dealing with a rib injury the last couple of weeks. He's been out the last couple of weeks. Came back today against the Jaguars. He looked great. Really impressed what we saw from Tua Tagovailoa so far in this game. 16 for 24, 152 yards and a touchdown is his stat line right now going in to the end of the second quarter of this game. Malcolm Brown leading the carries right now for Miami with 20 yards on 2 rushes. Had a long of 16. Myles Gaskin has 4 carries for only 8 yards. So the breakout Myles Gaskin game we saw last week, not looking like it's going to be the case today, bearing anything big in the second half. Mike Gesicki is leading the way through the air for Miami, 4 receptions for 50 yards. He's looked great as well. And Jalen Waddle, first-round pick out of Alabama at wide receiver, 4 receptions for 29 yards and a touchdown from him in that first half. He's played great as well. Had a big touchdown on that, a big play on that touchdown. And then Marvin Jones now with 58 yards on 4 receptions and that 28-yard touchdown we just told you about in that game. So we'll keep you updated throughout the rest of the hour as to what's going on in this game. But for now, let's look at the slate. The slate we have for Sunday NFL kickoff today. But before we actually get to the slate, let's preview the show. What are we going to talk about today for new listeners on WSOE, wherever you are driving around the Elon Burlington area, or also the new listeners and new viewers tuning in on the YouTube channel at the Slaw Sports Show. We're live there as well. Right now, what we're doing on the show, we will preview the Sunday slate, every single game, the important headlines of the game, how we think it's going to lean, what's the current spread of the game, all that kind of stuff. And then we get into our first break, Coming out of that, we will have our fantasy startums and situms. We have 2 starts and 2 sits to get into your fantasy lineup before we get out of here at 12 o'clock, and the lineups lock in at 1 o'clock. And then after that, we'll take a second break and come back with our lock and upset of the day for the NFL Sunday kickoff games going on this afternoon, later this evening. You get the gist. You get the deal. So let's go ahead and talk about this slate first and kick off what's to expect here today. And like I said, we'll keep checking in on this Dolphins-Jaguars game as we continue to go along. But let's start now with the 1 o'clock slate, 1 o'clock kickoff games. The early window in the NFL today. And let's start with Cincinnati going to Detroit. Cincinnati Bengals are 3.5-point favorites going on the road into the Motor City with Motor City Dan Campbell awaiting him as the head coach of the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell right now is not happy. We saw what happened last week against the Minnesota Vikings. That last, I think it was 37-second drive by Kirk Cousins, ending with a field goal, and them getting that win in that game. Another tough loss for this Detroit Lions team, and they're not a bad team by any means. They have players. They're nowhere near as bad as I think other teams around the league are. They just can't close it. They can't finish games, and it's hurting Dan Campbell right now. We saw him get really emotional in the presser after the game last week, and then during the week, he's promising a win will come soon, that this team is almost there to getting their first win of the season. 0-5 start so far this season for the Detroit Lions. The Cincinnati Bengals, they're coming off a tight loss to the Green Bay Packers in overtime. Multiple missed field goals in that game, but Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase look as great as always, and as great as they looked all year long. But Joe Burrow had a little bit of a scare and went to the hospital after the game with a throat contusion, I believe it was. He has been a little hoarse all week, not talking very loudly, in the locker or in practices, in meetings, everything we've heard coming out from the Cincinnati Bengals on Joe Burrow. But he should be fine and ready to go in this game against the Detroit Lions. Cincinnati is closing out their NFC North slate that they had this season with the Detroit Lions already here in Week 6. So let's see what happens. I mean, does Detroit finally get that first win? I mean, Motor City Dan Campbell is just sitting there and preaching that his team is getting closer and closer, and this team is rallying around him week after week. Finally, they need to get something, accomplished and push it over the edge and get a win here. So we'll see if that happens at this early window kickoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Next up, we have the Kansas City Chiefs against the Washington football team. Chiefs are 7-point favorites coming into Washington. Still not looked as great as we've seen them in past from the Kansas City Chiefs. Another big loss, I believe it was last week. I believe it was a win last week for the Kansas City Chiefs, but still not looked as great from what we've seen from the Chiefs so far this season. Patrick Mahomes, actually, yeah, it was a loss last week, to the Buffalo Bills in that Sunday night football game. I mean, that game got delayed like an hour at halftime. Easy to forget game, but still, nevertheless, Kansas City has not looked great this year. Patrick Mahomes is throwing turnovers after turnovers. He needs to get right, but this defense on both sides of the ball for Washington and for Kansas City have been straight up abysmal and straight up terrible and straight up inexcusable, you should say, for this defense. Neither side is looking great this year, and Washington especially, they're a unit we thought were supposed to look good this year, and they are nowhere near that level we thought they were going to play at defensively. So see which side it gives here in this game. Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin will play for Washington. They've been limited all week, but I do believe they're leaning toward more towards the side of playing in this one. Shouldn't expect anything unless there's some setbacks in the pregame here in the next hour and a half for those two guys. But I believe if I had to say that what would happen, and from what we've seen the last couple weeks with these two guys, they should be good to go and should be cleared right before kickoff. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out. He has suffered an MCL sprain in that Bills game. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks for the Kansas City Chiefs. So expect Darrell Williams to have a huge upside in this game and a lot of targets and a lot of carries in terms of what we normally see out of this Chiefs backfield. Still don't think we'll see a lot of the run game in this game, but when it's featured, it will be Williams leading the way. So next up, we go to Charlotte, just down the road here from Elon in Burlington, where the Minnesota Vikings are coming to town as 2.5-point favorites to take on the Carolina Panthers, who started out 3-0 and have since gone 0-2 their last two games. Christian McCaffrey has now been sent to the injury reserve as of yesterday, a move that should have happened weeks ago if you're the Carolina Panthers. Instead, they kept him around. They pushed him. They pushed him in practice, trying to get him to play the last 2 weeks, especially last week, and even going into this week on that injured hamstring, that hamstring strain. And sure enough, look what happened. That's not an injury you try to rush a running back from, or any player back from, is a hamstring sprain in the National Football League, or any type of hamstring issue. And sure enough, Christian McCaffrey is not able to go, and they will be shutting him down for the next 3 weeks, which they should have done from the get-go. But Minnesota coming into town, we're going to have to get another update here of what's going to happen with the Vikings. I do believe right now Dalvin Cook is leaning towards playing and returning to the lineup, but still, it's something to always consider with Dalvin Cook. He's always a late scratch, but it looks like he should be good to go. But again, we'll see what happens here closer to kickoff of this game. Alexander Madison's played great in his absence for Dalvin Cook. Kirk Cousins playing good as well so far. It looks like really now Mike Zimmer's finally letting him embrace himself a lot more as a quarterback and as a leader, get back to being that, hyped up Kirk Cousins we know and love, big energy, a lot of swagger, a lot of confidence. And that's when Kirk Cousins plays great, is when he has all that going for him. So Zimmer's letting that air out. We saw those two really start, was it headbutting, kind of chest bumping after that field goal win last week against the Detroit Lions as time expired. But Carolina, they have to get right. 3-0 to start the season, first 3 weeks of the season. Last 2 weeks, 0-2. Something's up, and something's wrong with the Carolina Panthers. Their defense hasn't been there the last 2 weeks, especially last week against the Philadelphia Eagles in the second half mainly. And Sam Darnold was back to being Sam Darnold last week. 3 interceptions in that game, all 3 of them in critical spots. Carolina has to get right in this one and try to get back on track here at home with the Vikings coming to town. So we'll see what happens there. Now we have an AFC South matchup. Indianapolis Colts are 10-point favorites. 10-point favorites at home against the Houston Texans. T.Y. Hilton has been activated for the first time this season. He dealt with a neck injury that had to require surgery on. He was placed on immediate IR just before the season started. So this is going to be his debut game of the 2021 season for T.Y. Hilton back in the lineup. We'll see how that affects Michael Pittman going forward in this game for fantasy owners out there. See how this affects Pittman going forward with both Hilton and Pittman in the lineup at the same time. We'll see how this target share goes with Carson Wentz passing the ball. See which receiver gets the more targets and the target share in this game. But the Houston Texans, Davis Mills has looked great the last 3 weeks. Maybe to no surprise. There's been a lot of good talk coming out about him coming out of Stanford, but no one really saw this from Davis Mills. Last week, 300-yard, 3-touchdown, no turnover game against Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. Is no small task to do if you're Davis Mills, but he accomplished it. Didn't get the win, but performance-wise, he played great, and that's a win in my book for a rookie quarterback. He's played, that game alone might have been one of the best rookie quarterback games we've seen this season, and it came from Davis Mills. So that tells you all you need to know about him. But at the same time, Tyrod Taylor is leaning closer and closer toward a comeback from his injury, and it looks like eventually when he is cleared, he will get the starting job back. So it's not going to be typical Tyrod Taylor that we've seen the last couple of years getting beat out of the job after going down with an injury. But he's working his way back from this hamstring injury. Still going to miss a couple more games, especially this week. Might end up trying to come back next week, but we'll see what happens with Tyrod Taylor. But David Culley, Coach Dave over there in Houston, did say the starting role is Tyrod Taylor's when he comes back into the lineup. So good for Tyrod Taylor going forward. Not good for Davis Mills going forward, who's now been playing his best football the last 3 weeks. And for the Indianapolis Colts, they played a great game last week against the Ravens on Monday night. Came up short, but Lamar Jackson had 500 yards and 5 touchdowns in that game. It was completely ridiculous what Lamar Jackson did in that game, beating them in overtime. But to start the game, they looked great. If you're the Indianapolis Colts, Carson Wentz played great again. Jonathan Taylor played great again. This team's trending in the right direction despite going now 1-4 to start the season. I like what they're doing, and I think they're gonna starting to get this train rolling back in the right direction if you're the Indianapolis Colts. Next up, let's go to the New York banged-up Giants taking on the Los Angeles Rams. Rams are coming into New York as 8-point favorites. Daniel Jones and Sterling Shepard are in and back in the lineup. Saquon Barkley and Kenny Golladay are out. Daniel Jones, clear concussion protocol. Big news for me in fantasy football. Unfortunately, I've been having to rely on Daniel Jones a lot in one of my leagues. So it's good that he's playing, good that he cleared protocol from his concussion. Need him back in my lineup especially, but so do the Giants. in this game with the Rams coming to town and that top defense they always have every year with Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. See what Daniel Jones does, working back through this progression of coming back into the lineup after a week of being knocked out last week against the Cowboys. Sterling Shepard's a big one, especially with Kenny Golladay out. They have missed him a lot the last couple of weeks. He should have a good game in this one, get a lot of targets going his way. And Kadarius Toney, the first-round pick out of Florida at wide receiver, he played great the last 2 weeks. Last week especially had over 10 touches, over 170 yards it was for Kadarius Toney, and before eventually getting ejected from that game against the Cowboys. But no suspension for Kadarius Toney, so he should be good to go as well in this one. So Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney highlight the options here for Danny Dimes and this Giants offense. And Devontae Booker will get the start at running back with Saquon Barkley out with an ankle injury. So speaking of LA, now let's go to the LA Chargers, who are traveling to the Baltimore Ravens, who are 2.5-point favorites at home. Mike Williams expected to play, which is big news for Justin Herbert in that passing game. And speaking of the passing game, Baltimore Ravens get a big boost this week with Rashad Bateman, first-round pick out of Minnesota, at getting activated with Sammy Watkins being out for that game. That's going to be probably the best game of the week. Excuse me. This Chargers-Baltimore game. Expecting another big shootout, high offensive affair. What we potentially could see down the road in this conference between the Chargers and the Ravens. So expect a big game here in this one at this 1 o'clock slate. Probably going to be the best one of the week, and obviously the best one of this slate. And the last one, the 1 o'clock slate, Green Bay Packers go to Chicago as 6-point favorites. 4-1 Green Bay 4-1 Green Bay Packers taking on the 3-2 Chicago Bears. Chicago looking iffy. Defense looks great. Offense not there. Especially now with Justin Fields back in. He is starting yet again. Started last week, got his first win against the Raiders in that game, but still didn't play great. And as an offense, didn't play great either for the Chicago Bears. And look at this. The Green Bay Packers since 2011 are 19-3 head-to-head against their rivals in the Chicago Bears. So as a Packers fan, what am I looking forward to into this game? The Bear Killer, Randall Cobb. Each week he's gotten more and more looks in this offense, in Matt LaFleur's offense since coming back to Green Bay, and his big games are always against Chicago. So I think a big game is coming for Randall Cobb this week. So even hold me to that. I think a big game is going to come this week for Randall Cobb against the Chicago Bears. He is the Bear Killer, and I think he has a shot to do it again today in this one. Green Bay, I think unbiasedly as 6-point favorites, should cover in this game going into Chicago. Chicago just not there offensively, I think, to keep up with the Green Bay Packers. Now we go to the 4 o'clock slate, Arizona and Cleveland. Cleveland at home as 3.5-point favorites. Cliff Kingsbury is out with COVID-19, testing positive multiple times for the Arizona Cardinals, so they will be without their head coach in this game. And Nick Chubb, starting running back for the Cleveland Browns, is out as well with a calf injury. Don't expect too much Kareem Hunt, even though I know he is now pushed up to running back 1 status in fantasy football. At the same time, he's dealing with the injury of his own, and head coach Kevin Stefanski already came out and said that he's not going to really rely heavily and use Kareem Hunt heavily in this game, despite Nick Chubb being out in this one. So I expect a lot more of a passing game, I would say, here in this one against the Arizona Cardinals. Undefeated Cardinals without their head coach, so they stay undefeated against the Cleveland Browns. Next up, we got the Denver Broncos 4-point favorites against the Las Vegas Raiders, who are now debuting a new head coach. After all the issues came out this week with John Gruden, he officially resigned as the head coach of the team. New head coach now, and for the Las Vegas Raiders as the interim head coach. See what happens here in this one. The Denver Broncos, same boat as the Carolina Panthers, 3-0 start to the season, 0-2 since then. Actually, the Raiders are the same way as well. Denver Broncos 4-point favorites in this one. See what happens here. What does this identity now look like with no distractions for the Las Vegas Raiders? We'll see what happens here going into Mile High in this game. And finally, on the 4 o'clock slate, the last game we have here, Dallas Cowboys, 3.5-point favorites at New England. 3.5-point favorites going in to Foxborough to take on the Patriots. Both running backs will play. Ezekiel Elliott and Damian Harris, both running backs all week, been dealing with some rib issues suffered from last week's games. Zeke and Damian Harris both will play in this one. I don't know. This one's going to be interesting to see how this one goes. Ultimately, it's going to be on the Dallas Cowboys. Do they keep things running the same way they have been? Or does Bill Belichick try to stump them and stumble them a little bit in this game? It'll be an interesting one to watch going forward at the end of this 4 o'clock slate. And Sunday Night Football. Sunday night ends with the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Seattle Seahawks at home as 5-point favorites. Geno Smith will get the ball to start for the first time in 1,413 days. Nearly 4 years, Geno Smith is back as a starting quarterback with Russell Wilson headed to the injured reserve list with that finger injury. Had surgery on it from last week on Thursday Night Football. Geno Smith gets an extended period now, thanks to that Thursday Night Football game, to prepare for this game against the Steelers, who now look like they are back, maybe. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, big win last week against the Denver Broncos. But also for the Seattle Seahawks, Chris Carson as well is headed to the IR. So Alex Collins, I assume, will get the bulk of the carries for the second straight week for the Seattle Seahawks. That wraps up our slate of what we're going to have on deck for today. Before we take a quick break, let's go back to this this London game. It is now into halftime, 13-10. Miami Dolphins leading over the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we got our fantasy starts and sits of the week. Get your lineup set before it locks in at 1 o'clock. You're listening to the Slaw Sports Show. All right, we are back here on the Slaw Sports Show. You are listening to the Slaw Sports Show. I'm your host, Cole Noble, a.k.a. Slaw. So we've talked about this Sunday slate we've got in store for throughout the entire day, the 1 o'clock games, 4 o'clock games, 8 o'clock games, Sunday Night Football, and obviously the game going on live right now across the pond, Miami Dolphins against the Jacksonville Jaguars. What about some fantasy talk? Let's talk some fantasy now for the next little bit. Because every week here on the Slaw Sports Show, we give our starts and sits of the week. And now we got 2 starts in this one and potentially even 2 sits that we're going to try to pull up here and get things rolling along for your fantasy football lineups. If you have any fantasy football questions, send them my way on Twitter at the Slaw Sports Show, at Slaw Sports Show. Just Slaw Sports Show on Twitter if you have any fantasy questions. If you're listening, you're dealing with someone or dealing with 2 players you don't know who to start one over. Anything like that, send them my way on Twitter. We got things rolling and ready to go. If you need any help setting your fantasy football lineups, but hopefully what we have going with our starts and sits this week should help out a lot with some of your questions you might have. So let's go ahead and get into it. Our first start of the week this week in Week 6 in fantasy football. We're going to go with the quarterback for the first time this season as a stardom for my fantasy football picks. And it's going to be Taylor Heinicke out of Washington for the Washington football team. Taylor Heinicke is going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's played great. 3 of the last 4 games in fantasy, he's had at least 23 points as a quarterback, which is great. That's a great performance in fantasy football from a quarterback. You can't complain about 23 points in that game. But also, a lot of 30-point games have been given up this year in fantasy by the Kansas City Chiefs. They've allowed the most points in fantasy football to quarterbacks since week 1. And they've also allowed 10 touchdowns and 0 turnovers against quarterbacks in their last 3 games. So Taylor Heinicke, I think you fire him up this week, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs for the Washington football team. Really like what is potentially going to happen here and what's going to brew in this game. It's looking like a big, offensive battle. Really, it's going to be a big offensive battle in this game. That I'm excited to see what happens here going forward in this one. Next up, with our fantasy football NFL Week 6 stardom, we're going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown, rookie wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. This one's a deep start. If you're in a deep league and you're trying to get something, or if you're in a deep, 12, 15, 17, 20-man league, you need a running back, you need a wide receiver, you need a flex option this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown is your guy. Make sure you get him. Make sure you put him in if you have him on the bench in your lineups, even in potentially like 12-man leagues, which is the deep start for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I still think he's a great pick. Don't need to risk it at all with Amon-Ra St. Brown this week in fantasy football. He scored 13 points in PPR formats in back-to-back weeks now. He had 8 targets in both games for the Detroit Lions. And right now, going into this week, might be his best game of the year for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Quintez Cephas is out of this game with a collarbone injury. Will be out for the multiple weeks now in this passing game for the Detroit Lions, which means Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie has now been lifted up to the number one option, number one position on the depth chart right now at wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. He's the number 1 guy. And the other thing with this offense, all the defensive attention is going to be attracted toward TJ Hawkinson, their tight end, in this one. So I expect a lot of targets to go Amon-Ra St. Brown's way from Jared Goff in this game. Cincinnati Bengals are the ranked 21st, versus wide receivers in fantasy football this year. And they also gave up 200-plus yards to Davante Adams last week against the Packers. Now that is Davante Adams, and Davante Adams and Amon-Ra St. Brown are nowhere near the same level of a wide receiver by far. That's easy to say, I would say. But anyways, a big game just given up by this Cincinnati Bengals defense. I don't think it gets to that level, but I do potentially see Amon-Ra St. Brown going over the 100-yard mark in this game. So I like him in this one. Fire him up as a starter in your fantasy football lineups in this one. So I'm really excited to see what happens here from Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's a guy I really liked and really enjoyed coming out of USC. And I previewed this to happen, predicted this to happen going forward once he got drafted by Detroit, is that he would eventually take over as the lead guy in this offense at the wide receiver position. Didn't think it would be this quick. Week 6 now, he is fired up as the number 1 guy in this offense at wide receiver. So I think he's an easy start this week against Cincinnati. Just the matchups there. The trend is there the last 2 games. And now the opportunity for even more target share is there this week for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I'm excited to see what he can do now with the full bulk of a workload going into this game. Now let's go over to our sits of the week. We got a running back and potentially a wide receiver here in this one to talk about. Let's start off with Damian Harris at running back for the New England Patriots. He's going up against the Dallas Cowboys. We talked about it when we previewed this game. He's dealing with a rib injury right now from Week 5 against the Houston Texans, but still, I'm still going to avoid Damian Harris, despite the fact that he is going to start in this game, and he's going to, he's going to be ready to go in this one as the starter against the Dallas Cowboys. I'm still weary of him. I actually took him out of my lineups last night, so I think you should do the same. He's going to be a player I say just sit this week in fantasy football. Right now, Dallas have allowed their first touchdown to a running back last week against the New York Giants. In that game, Devonta Booker actually scored 2 touchdowns coming in replace of Saquon Barkley, but still, they just gave up their first touchdown on the ground 5 weeks into the season. Not excited to see what happens here for Damian Harris in this game. The other thing you got to consider is the other options in the backfield in this one. Brandon Baldwin is getting more and more involved in the passing game and getting all the targets and stealing all the targets like a vulture does in this, in fantasy football. And then with this rib injury that Damian Harris is dealing with, I think that Ramondre Stevenson is going to steal some more carries in this game as well. So we're going to see what happens here for the New England Patriots. But I say sit Damian Harris in fantasy football this week if you got him. And another player I'm sitting, we're going to go with a wide receiver now, Allen Robinson. I am sitting him this week in one of my lineups. I think you should do the same. Right now, he has not played great. Allen Robinson, he's eclipsed over 35 yards only one time this season, only has one touchdown, and he's currently the wide receiver 63. 63 in fantasy football. I know he's a player you invested a high pick on. I did the same thing. You want to start Allen Robinson. I had the same situation going over on my team last week. I have Allen Robinson and Robert Woods. Both guys I spent high draft picks on, and both guys I'm like just starting them week in and week out, and I'm like, come on, this is the week. This is the week. This is the week. We got that from Robert Woods last week. I don't think we get that from Allen Robinson this week. I don't think this is the week he goes off and has his game finally that makes you happy with this high draft pick you gave on him. But at this point, I think it's time to sit Allen Robinson. I sat him last week. I'm sitting him again this week. He's going up against the Packers defense that is kind of bare thin in the secondary. No Jair Alexander and Kevin King. He's not looking likely to play either. So they're going to be forced to rely on first-round pick Eric Stokes as their number one corner in this game. But still, the Green Bay Packers giving up the fifth fewest points per game to wide receivers this year. That doesn't help Allen Robinson's case going forward in this game. Not excited to see what he can do in this one against the Green Bay Packers. It's tough. You hate to see it. We all spent high draft picks on Allen Robinson, if I'm talking to any Allen Robinson owners out there. But still, not excited of what's happening and what's to come for him in this offense going forward. He's not looked great with Andy Dalton. He's looked even worse with Justin Fields, who's now the starter indefinitely going forward. And from what we've seen from Justin Fields, that he favors Darnell Mooney, which is something I thought would happen going forward this year. But I didn't expect to see this type of regression from Allen Robinson. Might even potentially be time to give up on him if he has another bad game this week. It's too late to trade him, and the best thing you can hope for is just keep him on the bench. So sit Allen Robinson and Damian Harris this week and fire up Amon St. Brown and fire up Taylor Heineke in your lineups this week. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we got our lock of the week, our upset of the week, and potentially answer some questions we have as well coming in on social media. So send in questions your way. We'll get to them when we come back from a break and do our locks and upsets before we get out of here at the 12 o'clock mark. You're listening to the Saw Sports Show. Hang around, stick around. We'll be right back. All right, we're back here on the Slaw Sports Show. We talk some fantasy. We talk some potential games upcoming in this game. Now, let's talk some locks and talk some upsets. But before we get there, we got some headlines to get to coming in on Twitter from My Sports Update and Ian Rappaport, the best place to get your breaking sports news. We got some inactives and actives in this one. So far, looks like Allen Robinson will play, who we just talked about sitting him. That was expected. He is to play, but he's dealing with an injury, another cause for concern to not start him this week in fantasy football. Packers offensive lineman Elton Jenkins is back, which is a big boost for that offensive line. He has not played since week 2. Joe Mixon will play. Terry McLaurin, T.Y. Hilton, and DeAndre Swift are all active in this game. So T.Y. will officially make his season debut today, like we discussed earlier in the episode. And Giants rookie wide receiver Kadarius Toney, who is listed as questionable with an ankle injury, is also officially active against the Rams. The Giants will be without Saquon Barkley, Kenny Golladay, and Darius Slayton in this game. So like we said, Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney leading the charge there with Daniel Jones back in the lineup. So now let's get to the locks and upset of the day. Each week we give a lock, and each week we give an upset. Lock is the guaranteed win. Upset is a huge favorite for one team. We see it going the other way, and the other team taking them down. Upsets so far have been pretty good. Locks so far have been pretty good as well. I think we still have only missed out on one lock this season. So pretty happy about that fact going forward. So this week, our lock of the week will be the LA Rams as 8-point favorites over the New York Giants. Doom. Lock it in. The Rams are 4-1 this season, while the Giants are the flip side, 1-4 this season. Giants have not looked great at all throughout this season. They started looking good 2 weeks ago, but then got hit with massive injuries last week that we just discussed. But Daniel Jones is back. Sterling Shepard is back in this game. Kadarius Toney is going to play. But still, I don't see this happening for the New York Giants. I think the Rams come in and take care of business. I think this one could get ugly. From what we've seen from the Rams so far this season, when Matthew Stafford has a clean pocket, he is lining defenses up, picking them apart, throw by throw. And I think that's going to, again, be the case today against the New York Giants, because I don't think they can get pressure. They have not gotten pressured all this season. Their leading sack leader right now has gotten all of their sacks. And his rookie edge rusher, Azeez Ojulari, has all of their sacks right now as a team, as a rookie. Not doing good right now for this unit defensively for the New York Giants. The Rams are the number 1 team in sack preventions this year. Pretty much a clean pocket almost every single snap so far for Matthew Stafford. And the New York Giants are 28th in sacks, sacks defensively. So I think the Rams in this one, I think Matthew Stafford stays clean, and I think he picks his defense apart throughout the entire game. I think this one gets ugly. So lock it in. Doom. Rams over Giants as 8-point favorites in this game. So now we got our upset of the week. Get the alarms going. In this one, the upset is going to be the Washington football team over the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Chiefs lose another one this week. Chiefs 7-point favorites going into Washington. Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, they have been cleared. We talked about how they're potentially going to be a game time decision. Well, it's been 40 minutes since we talked about it. They're good to go. In this one, it's going to be a high-scoring offensive affair in this one, because this matchup is going to feature two of the worst defenses in the National Football League this year in Kansas City and Washington. But turnover battle is going to be the key in this one if Washington wants to win. Right now, Kansas City Chiefs have had 11 turnovers on offense, while the Washington football team has only had 7. Still a lot for an offense in terms of turnovers with 7, but not as much as Kansas City with their 11. It's going to be a high-scoring offensive shootout, I believe, in this game. The bettors are heavily favoring the over in the point spread in this one. The total points, they're favoring the over of the over-under in this game. It's easy to see why. Big offensive performance, likely coming both ways. Taylor Heineke is my start this week in fantasy football, so I'm obviously expecting him to have a big game. And Patrick Mahomes, He needs to get things right offensively. We'll see what he can do in this one to get right back on track, or do the interceptions, do the fumbles, do they still come for Patrick Mahomes in this one? Does Chase Young step up and be a leader on this defense in this game and get after Patrick Mahomes in this Chiefs offense? We'll see what happens, because that's the way I'm leaning. So I'm taking Washington football team. Sound the alarms as the upset in this one. 7-point favorites for the Kansas City Chiefs. Give me Washington to upset them in this game. Let's get to some questions we have here now, just overall about some potential things and some potential storylines going into Sunday's games in this one. Bringing it up here now in this game, bringing up the questions here that you guys have for Sunday. Number one, does Kareem Hunt take over as the lead back in this game against the Arizona Cardinals, the undefeated Cardinals? Nick Chubb out with a calf injury. But the question is, does Kareem Hunt take over? It's a good question. Kareem Hunt, from what we've seen of him whenever he is in the lineup as the lead back, has played great in this offense with the Cleveland Browns. He's played great this year, really tiptoeing that line, you could say, with who's been the better back this year with between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. But Kareem Hunt this week gets the go as the starter with Nick Chubb out. But at the same time, Kareem Hunt's dealing with some injuries on his own. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle him. He said he's ready to hold it down in that backfield with Nick Chubb out. But at the same time, Kevin Stefanski on the other side, as the head coach, said that he's not going to potentially rely heavily on him. He's dealing with a wrist and knee injury in this game going into it as the starter. So I don't think he takes over as the lead back in this one, but I still think he has a pretty good game. But again, like I said, I think the offense is going to rely on the run game and Baker Mayfield in this one against the Cardinals. So I would say no, Kareem Hunt will not take over as the lead back. Just the injuries concern me a little bit in this game for Kareem Hunt. These a wrist and a knee injury. I think Dearness Johnson gets some work out of the backfield, and also potentially even some Demetric Felton as well to help with this load and this missing piece in Nick Chubb. Next one is Christian McCaffrey. Actually, more about the injury or more about the money? Speaking heavily toward his injury guarantees, he's got heavily laden throughout that contract he got with the Carolina Panthers. I think it's more just mismanagement by the Carolina Panthers. Hamstring injuries should be considered a serious thing for a running back, and I think that he's been mismanaged by the Carolina Panthers. They're hurting him right now more than he's hurting himself, or more than he's trying to money grab from the Carolina Panthers. Last year, it made sense. This year, I think it's more just mismanagement and an actual injury that they need to be heavily worried about with Christian McCaffrey and pay special attention to with him going forward in this team, or else he's just going to be nagged with it throughout the rest of the season. So it was a good thing they did yesterday, sending him to the IR and letting him take some time now to heal. Next up, what does Jacksonville do with the number one overall pick? So we're assuming here Jacksonville, who right now is 0-5, stays that way, or at least stays as the worst team in the league and gets the number one overall pick. Obviously, it's going to be Theodo, Theodo from Oregon. He has played great. Last week had 11 pressures, I believe, in the second half, this week, for Oregon in their game. What they saw, it was a big win by Oregon late in that game. It should not have come to that. What we saw against California, a 24-17 win for the Oregon Ducks. But the question is, who's going to be the number one pick, and who's Jacksonville going to take? I think it's Kayvon Theodo in this one. He played great, got a sack in that game, was huge in that final drive to stop Cal from getting in the end zone to close out that win. So I think that's where Jacksonville goes. So they get the number one overall pick. Just beef up and continue to beef up that defensive line. Theodo would be a great pick and a great way to do so. Next up, still talking about some Jacksonville, is Urban Meyer a one and done as a head coach for the Jaguars? And if so, does Shad Khan go after Dabo Swinney? This is really interesting because Dabo Swinney is a name that got mentioned a little bit on Twitter. Back on Monday it was, with all the stuff coming out about John Gruden now resigning as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. I thought potentially we could see Dabo getting a run from Mark Davis to be their head coach. But this one's interesting too. Jacksonville going after Dabo, Trevor Lawrence, a lot of connection there. They spoke with him last year when they had the head coach opening, wanting to pair him up with Trevor Lawrence again. It could be possible. I do think the way Clemson's played this year that Dabo could be on the move toward the big ranks in the National Football League, and I think he can make the jump. If Urban Meyer's one and done, it could be Jacksonville, it could be the Raiders, it could be another opening that opens up later this season. But still, I think Dabo is a serious contender to be a head coach and get a head coaching hire next year in the NFL if he wants to take it, which I believe he should. The way this team is looking right now as for the Clemson Tigers. And finally, how will Arizona do with their COVID issues within their coaching staff, especially with head coach Cliff Kingsbury out after testing positive multiple times with COVID-19? How does this happen, or how does this affect this team in this game? It's going to be interesting. I mean, you look at the team on the other side. They dealt with the same issue last year in the playoffs. First round of the playoffs against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they had a massive win. Jumped out to a huge lead in that game, got a big win on the road, taking out a division rival in the playoffs without Kevin Stefanski and a lot of their coaching staff. Still, it's a lot, and it's a tough ask and a lot to ask without having your head coach in this game. What's going to happen now for the Arizona Cardinals in this one? We got some clarification of this offense and how it's going to operate. It looks like Spencer Whipple will assist Sean Kugler in play calling for the Cardinals with Cliff Kingsbury out. Whipple is the son of former UMass coach Mark Whipple, who spent some time in the NFL, is now the OC for Pittsburgh. So now let's see. It's going to be interesting to see how this team operates without their coaching staff and see how this affects them. Cleveland did great. Didn't bother them at all last year, but that's Cleveland. This is a different story with Arizona, potentially a 5-0 team. This is a big game. To hope to stay undefeated in this one on the road in Cleveland against the Browns, who looked great this year. So Arizona, how they do with COVID issues, I don't know. This one's going to be interesting to see because it's a rare situation that we've seen so far in this time and in this predicament. So we'll see what happens for the Arizona Cardinals in this one. That's all the questions we've got coming our way from that one. So before we wrap up here and get out of here at the start of the hour, I do want to go back across the pond real quick because we got a little bit of some updates to hit you with. James Robinson has gotten into the end zone. He has now have 13 carries, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Jacksonville has come up to a 17-13 point lead in the third quarter. 1 minute and 18 seconds remaining. Dolphins have the ball and are driving. Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence both have surpassed the 200-yard mark. Tua with a slight edge at 212. Trevor Lawrence at 209. No receptions so far from Tavon Austin in this one, but Marvin Jones leading the way still. 6 receptions, 80 yards, and a touchdown. And Laviska Shenault has 3 receptions for 26 yards on 7 targets. Woof. A bad play on my end this week in fantasy football. Really liked Laviska Shenault in this matchup with both starting cornerbacks out for the Miami Dolphins. And in their passing game, leading the way still is Mike Gesicki. Actually, Mac Hollins has now taken the lead in the yardage with 4 receptions for 61. But Gesicki leading the way reception-wise, actually right behind Jalen Waddle, who's got 6 for 49 and a touchdown. Gesicki still being consistent. 5 receptions for 58 yards on 6 targets for Gesicki. See what happens here. Dolphins are driving in this one late in the third. See if they come back on top of the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for tuning in and checking us out. We'll be back tomorrow on our podcast. You can find on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, anywhere you get a podcast. Just search up the Saw Sports Show. Every Monday, we have our Overreaction Monday, overreacting to everything we saw on Sunday and previewing Monday Night Football as well. That's why I didn't get to it on today's show. We'll get to it tomorrow on the podcast. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for tuning in on WSOE 89.3 Elon Burlington. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for tuning in on YouTube as well, where we've been live at the Saw Sports Show. But remember, our lock of the week this week, LA Rams, doom, over the New York Giants. Upset alert. Washington football team over the Kansas City Chiefs. And our start and sit-ems of the week in fantasy football, Taylor Heineke against the Kansas City Chiefs and Amon-Ra St. Brown against the Cincinnati Bengals. And we're sitting Damian Harris against the Dallas Cowboys and Allen Robinson against the Green Bay Packers. Again, that's all the time we have. Until next time, peace.